What I'm going to do tonight is not in fact give you a complete history of the gay movement from 19 years in half an hour. Instead, what I'm going to look at is the present movement that's grown up over Clause 28, to explain briefly why I believe it is such a large and so far angry movement. To compare this present situation with the movements group in the past to see how they can explain something that I think is quite disturbing or quite noticeable about all the gay movements that have grown up, and that is when you look at Stonewall and the GLF that was formed in Britain in 1970, or when you look at the movement that's grown up very recently, just from December, really from nowhere. Both movements have one thing in common, and that is how short-lived they always are. When you look at the past movements, you find explain things happening already, that even though the present movement is the biggest that Britain's ever seen, and the demonstration in Manchester was the largest gay demonstration Britain's ever had, much larger than the ones in GLF time, in a period of much higher level of class struggle. Nevertheless, even now, it's only 3 months old, there are signs of fragmentation, there are disagreements, there are splits, there is movement is hesitating before going forward. If you look at now the country, many of the groups come drawn round, the 1228 have split across Britain. When you look at the walkout of the Manchester conference, which actually was badly attended to start with, you see these disagreements that's going on in London between the trade union committee and the main committee. It's very easy to get disillusioned to say what's happening here, why it's happening, oh it's only just grown up, why did it fragment so quickly? And in fact you could in fact say the same thing over the GLS. When you think it was the last of the movements to arise, and it grew up, to understand why it grew up, you must look at the period. And of course there's no better way to look at the period to, for example, we grew up from 1968. It grew up in a period of massive level of struggle on all levels. National liberation, women's liberation, gay liberation, huge level of strikes, huge demonstrations, like a tidal wave of unrest swept the world, around Vietnam, in Paris, in Prague, etc., etc. The gay movement was the last of the movements to arrive, but it was the first of them to go. It only lasted 2 to 3 years, and then it fragmented and disintegrated. And what took 2 and 3 years to happen in the early 70s has now taken 2 or 3 months. Really, from December to now, there's signs of the same fragmentation occurring. And what I want to look at in this history of the gay movement, I was looking at one aspect to try and explain this. It's very easy to get demoralised when you see this happening, when you're involved in it, unless you understand why it's happening. And I believe it's happening for a number of related reasons. First of all, it's important to understand that the movement that's grown up around Clause 28 is not just about Clause 28. The clause has happened of the last bit of a whole series of attacks on lesbians and gays in the last 3 or 4 years. That it's been like the thick edge of the wedge that sparked off a revolt against it. When you put it into the context of the thing around AIDS, the witch hunt that's been drawn up around AIDS, the figures that we know of about 2,000 people, lesbians and gays, in the last 2 years have lost their jobs just because they're lesbian and gays. That's according to Peter Tatchell anyway. There is about 100 people in the last 2 years have been murdered in queer bash to death, mostly gay men, which is 1 a week. A massive increase in queer bashing. When you see that the whole history in the 80s again, of the courts taking children off lesbian mothers, and that you put that in the background of the Alton Bill, the background of the welfare state under attack, of the NHS, there is a general offensive, a reinforcing of the family. Anything that seems to deviate from the family norm is being sat upon, squashed on, is being attacked. And Clause 28 must be seen in that generalised attack upon the freedoms, semi-freedoms, the rights won in the previous period. That is why the movement that's grown up has been so large. That is why it has been so angry, particularly early on, and that's why it is quite important. So what I want to try and explain is why it's been so crucial, it's so angry, so of course why it is that the movement even now is splintering, is disintegrating. As it did indeed in 1972, GLF founded, it collapsed before the rest of the struggle went down. You know, the SWP made its mistake of talking about the downturn. but even the wildest stretch of imagination, 1972 was not the downturn in any part of the world whatsoever. And that was when GLF started to fragment. Now, one general argument is, of course, that liberation movements do have within them, like a hidden agenda, as people say these days. They have within it conflicts, because they are basically trying to put together different classes, the working class, the middle class, and even elements of the ruling class sometimes, in various liberation movements. So one underlying argument is that the conflicts inside all liberation movements to try to bridge the gap, the class divide, tend to fragment. In national liberation movements, over struggles for independence of countries, this can take decades. In the gay movement, it tends to take weeks. And I think that isn't a necessary explanation of why that is. I'm thinking that there's three major reasons. And first of all, why it happened so quickly this time, it did take a few years in 1972, now it's taken a few months, is the nature of the period of the moment. This is not 1972 or 1968, it's 1988. The general level of class struggle, the general situation of the political climate overall, the lack of struggle, the control the bureaucracy have over anybody fighting back inside the trade union movement, the general level of political climate feeds back into the gay movement. The gay movement isn't immune from the atmosphere it occurs in, it feeds back into it and does sort of have its deadening effect on it. Its failure to spread is because the rest of the movement hasn't spread. In the same sort of way, the issue of anger over hospital closures in early February has as yet been sort of controlled by the bureaucracy. That's the first reason. The second reason, which I think is in many ways more important, more particularly important to the gay movement, is that the ideas that dominate inside the gay movement are ones which are quite pernicious and ones which hold it back. And those ideas all are quite different, but they all share something in common. I suppose if you want to define them more closely, they're the ideas of separatism, the ideas of left reformism, and the ideas of lifestyle politics. All those bodies of ideas actually all came together to form an uneasy consensus in the early 80s, located inside the Labour Party, located inside the Labour councils actually, before than that, the GLC, Hackney, Lambeth, etc. Nevertheless, they all came together, evolved towards a general consensus which was based on an analysis of gay repression I believe to be wrong, but those bodies still dominate the movement and the left overall and now actually hinder it. And they share a number of things in common. And the one thing I think that primarily they share in common is that they all view oppression as being the starting point for ways you look, or you go no further than you took in the gay oppression. So they see the divisions, the oppressions of various groups in society coming from a body of ideology. That racism creates racist institutions, that heterosexism creates fear and hatred of gays, that patriarchy creates the oppression of women. In other words, that there's this body of ideas, these isms, that exist in the world, and then they are responsible for shaping people's thoughts and ideas, and then institutions and people act upon them. They are, I would, in a Marxist term, basically idealist formulations of the problem. In other words, they accept for granted the divisions and try to explain that division inside it. Now, I believe that naturally has a tendency towards further defining. It naturally leads towards a disintegration of the movement, defining who is more oppressed than somebody else. I'll give you an example of that. I remember a few years ago reading the collected writings, not of her novels, but her writings, essays of Alice Walker, who is the woman most famous for writing a novel called The Colour Purple. And in those essays, and I know that her novels and her writings is something Alice Walker has always been particularly sensitive to and obsessed with oppression, black oppression, lesbian oppression, etc. And in her first writings, written at the end of the 60s, when she was in the civil rights movement in the Deep South, she's very much concerned of the situation of blacks generally being oppressed by white American society. She then goes on in the 70s, when she realises, which is quite a common experience, the women's movement grew out of the civil rights movement in many ways, how inside the civil rights movement that women were put down by the men. So she defines it further than that. She then discovers that inside the women's movement, racism exists. So the black women are oppressed by white women. She then also notices, and you can just see that historically how she defines herself smaller and smaller little groups going down. How that pale-skinned black women had a higher status than black-skinned women in American society, which is also true. She then noticed that lesbian, dark-skinned were, and she then discovered classism, the working class lesbian, dark-skinned. You end up, if you're looking at just that term, that defines itself down and down and down, it naturally leads forward to the politics, leads not to linking together, not to advancing the struggle, but to disintegration, to defining who is more oppressed than anybody else. So the world becomes like a layer cake of different oppressors with no unifying factor. And you have, and therefore the whole world becomes one in which there are different power structures we have to relate to. It leads naturally to the politics and the operation of separatism, which largely is faded away these days, into the autonomy. Everybody must have their own autonomy. Everybody must be separated, isolated off. And I think those ideas grew up in the period when the struggle went down. Because as Marx once said, that the past, like a nightmare, hangs on the present. And the body of ideas that dominating the movement don't relate to the present struggle now, when people go on the demos and you're collective, you're feeling as one, you want to, spontaneously attack down these streets, etc. You don't. The body of ideas in people's heads don't relate to the experience of today. They've actually grown up in a period of 10 years ago, 5 years ago, when struggle wasn't going forward, it was retreating. When struggle wasn't advancing, it was on the down, it was on the back. And those body of ideas hold back the present. They're like a nightmare on the present. And I think that's a very important factor that has affected the gay movement. It's affected other movements as well, not just saying this is unique. You can see the same thing in any form of struggle. The backlog of ideas lag behind things that have experienced, always has a deadening effect on it, that become a hindrance to struggle going forward. I think those two ideas together partly explain why the gay movement has been so fragmented. And I am, in the second half of the meeting, going to briefly go through a history from GLF to the present day of how these ideas formulated themselves in different organisations, etc. But I think there's a third underlying thing that makes gay oppression particularly prone to this fragmentation, and that is to do with gay oppression in itself. Because unlike other forms of oppression, say blacks, or other groups in society, say women, gay oppression starts from the individual much more. It's not as if the black person, the midwife said, oh look, here's a black baby. The midwife said, oh look, here's a lesbian. People aren't born automatically to be lesbian or gay men. The whole process of having to come out, which is so crucial to fighting gay oppression, is to come out, to accept the label, involves a fight within yourself to accept that label, to take that label as a badge of pride, and then to want to fight it. But it very much starts from the individual. It means that the politics can lead, as the pamphlet says, out, proud and fighting. But it can lead to out, proud and buying a separate lifestyle, out, proud and seeking a separate solution, out, ashamed of being a gay vicar on TV, as we so many these days. A gay vicar's hunt going on TV with all their strange contortions of their face, you can't see who they are, etc. In other words, just because you accept the label to yourself does not automatically lead to a collective response to oppression. And this makes it more individualistic than other fightbacks, other struggles against other forms of oppression. It can very easily, particularly in a period when struggle is not common, it's actually quite rare, has led to the idea of individual solutions to lifestyle politics, that I will solve it myself, that being gay is just about me, and I can solve it myself. It doesn't lead automatically to having to link with other groups, other oppressed, or having the need to link to working class and struggle. There's no automatic collectivity about it, as there often is with other liberation struggles. So I think those three facts have to be held in mind when you look at the history of the gay movement since Stonewall, since the GLF. And I want to concentrate in this country because I think, well, we're living in this country, so it's more important to us, is that when you look at the gay movement, what happened to it, you look at the GLF that grew up in 1970, when it was formed in London. They were, to start with, a whole mishmash of, well, basically quite silly ideas, but very radical ideas at the same time. A real classic ultra-left movement grew up in 1970. Without having to go on too much in detail, but just look at the slogans they had at the time. Some of that they were very much into street politics, you know, out of the closet, onto the streets. Well, not to write on these days, but Sodom today, Gomorrah the world, feel good, do it. They have certain bits about them. The whole thing of, you know, the revolution is next week, or at the very latest, the week next Wednesday, and all you've got to do is do it now. Don't just say it, live it, etc., etc. It was a very exciting period in which that actually had some currency, you know. Students in Paris were saying similar ultra-left things, etc. It did appear to be not as silly as it seems now. Nevertheless, it created, unintentionally, the whole thing of gay politics came back onto the agenda, a political agenda of the left, where it had not been since the 1920s, which is an awful long time. So the gay movement came back with a whole ultra-left, optimistic view of how it's going to change society. It viewed that the family was the central pillar of society. So if you just get with the family, society would totally collapse and build a new one. It was that simple, they thought, that easy. We'll just go and be like that, with no problem whatsoever. Now those ideas obviously had to hit reality. They hit reality quite early on. And they fragmented, I think for the reasons I've given you quite early on as well. The nature of gay oppression led to fragmentation very quickly. And you'll see the movement splitting really after just 2 years of existence. First of all, the first major shift has been in GLF to start with. Between a quarter and a third of GLF were women, were lesbians. Very early on, lesbians discovered that gay men can be just as sexist, just as anti-women as straight men can. In fact, in some cases, there's certain milieux they can be more so. They can be sort of men who only like men, have nothing to do with women, etc. So there was a division quite early on between when the movement went, divisions opened up, basically on the say. And it actually went in two directions, both of which were a retreat from the past. Because for all its faults, the early gay movement was out to change the world. It wanted to smash society, it wanted to smash capitalism, in those terms. The movement, the scene that took over from the gay movement no longer did so. It had different strategies, but essentially they wanted to create oases inside straight society. The pink economy grew up, so that for gay men, actually it was a depoliticization of being gay. Now in being gay, this meant you went to the right clubs, you wore the right clothes, you went to the right places. It was, you know, a form of consumerism. Being gay means you consume certain goods, consume a certain amount of people as well. So it was that sort of pink economy. The lesbians moved much more towards the women's movement. And their strategy of Oasis wasn't developed a big scene, there was limited parts of the scene developed, but actually very limited indeed. It was much more, let's create heterosexual-free zones. Let's create lesbian-only areas. Let's become separatists, not touch or have anything to do with nasty heterosexual society. Both strategies are no longer trying to change the world, they're trying to create Oasis inside. It's totally retreat from transforming society, just creating space inside it to try and get by. And those of them meant that the activists of GLF were activists without a movement. They were there, but the movement had gone. The scene had swallowed up the movement. The movement had been very large, the scene had been very tiny. The gay movement inadvertently created a market for capitalists to exploit, the pink economy, and they did so quite successfully. So you had a whole situation in which, beginning in 1975 to 1980, there was a total rethink between gay activists of the previous period who had laid down the theories of changing society, smashing capitalism, particularly centred around a publication called Gay Left, and people which now wrote the books like Jeffrey Wiggs, Bob Kahn, Nigel Yost. If you look in the Gay Left, that's where they all came from. And they did what another bunch of feminists were doing at the same time. They looked at the writers, particularly Althusser and particularly for gay men, Foucault, and they looked at these ideas to explain to them why a shift in their politics to the right. And what they now argued was that class was no longer important. What they now argued was that we can't change society, it's much more complicated than that. They actually, with a radical shift to the right, dramatic shift to the right, round the gay left collective, which was very small but very large in influence, and the whole rewrite or re-looking at gay politics towards the right, towards trying to work inside the structures of our society, transform it. It was a reworking of old-fashioned reformism in long words there by and large, unintelligible half of them. But nevertheless, it was all trying to look at how you can work inside present-day society. And all this rethinking was going on late 70s, early 80s. At the same time that was happening, because there's a converging at this point in the 80s between these essentially rightward moving ideas and the Labour Party. Up until now, the 80s, the Labour Party had nothing to do with the gay movement at all, really. Had nothing to do with the fight for sexual liberation. We're just not on the agenda. In the 80s, there was the renaissance of the Labour left, particularly around Tony Benn. But not just Tony Benn. There was a distilling of the ideas of the movements that went on inside the Labour Party, and a new left reformism was created that at the time, only 4 or 5 years ago, it seems like 20 years ago, think about it, when Tony Benn you couldn't get to the meetings to hear Tony Benn speaking at the town hall, but thousands of people wanted to see him. The Labour left was huge in that period, in the early 80s. And they redistilled some ideas, so they adopted some gay rights to their programmes, which previously they had been totally alien to. And so there was a merging together to what the activists who had come from the gay movement, all of them, the majority of them, and the Labour Party left, and there was a forming together. And the best example of that was the GLC Gay Committee. And so the GLC Gay Committee, the Labour Party, became a home for the old activists who now had their new ideas about how to fight for gay rights. So they grew up a sort of committee politics which dominates them. Everyone been to these 1228 meetings, which can drive you insane with their tedium, will know this is where it has come from. So for years you have grown up a body of people who believe that the way forward for gay rights is you have to win the right subcommittee with the right little, to get the right amendment to the right subcommittee, to the right movement, the right forward, etc. It's the old-fashioned politics of the Labour Party subcommittee group going through. And that really dominated the movement through the 80s till the present time. The Labour Party was now seen as the vehicle through which you could change society. Because it was argued no longer for separatism, but for autonomy. The word separatism cut yourself off from straight society is probably gone, by and large. I mean, 1 or 2 outposts, but by and large it's totally disappeared now. It had evolved into the belief in autonomy. And the argument was that the Labour Party was the broad church. The Labour Party united all different sections of society who tried to fight to change it. Therefore, the Labour Party give you your space, give you autonomy to work within it. You can begin your lesbian and gay subcommittee, and within that you can influence the rest of the movement. And to a certain element, it was successful in the fact that the Gay Centre was set up in London, actually all pittances. I mean, what they needed to money for lesbian business. It's a total joke. It actually was minute amounts of money went to any lesbian or gay communities. But nevertheless, this never happened before. It was definitely some form of step forward. But in effect, they incorporated the activists and incorporated into the structure of the Labour Party, particularly the local councils. What's happened now, however, in the 1228, is really the politics linger on, even though the experience since 83 has been that this has been an absolute disaster. Every time the Labour Party is committed to winning elections. Every opinion poll, every survey done shows that lesbians and gays are highly unpopular, particularly whipped up over age, but even before then. Any indicator you want to see will show you that supporting lesbian and gays loses you votes. This is a terrible contradiction to the Labour Party. The Labour Party is built upon getting in elections in local councils. For them, that's the only way forward. They therefore have this awful contradiction of they, on one level, support gay rights, but supporting gay rights loses them votes. What do? They ditch gay rights. And time again, Peter Tatchell, the Bermondsey by-election, we go on and on and on and on. We can go into them if people want to think it's necessary. Every time the Labour Party has been tested on gay rights, it has failed. It's failed over and over again. And rather than the broad church structure giving lesbian gays power, it's made them weak. Because being inside the Labour Party, they accept the same logic of the Labour Party. They also believe the only way forward is through having to win this election. So, for example, when Chris Smith, the only out MP in Islington South, it was very important for him to get re-elected last election. The gay community, well, not really organised, but there was masses of canvassing went on for Chris Smith, nearly all of which was from gay men round that community in Islington. Because if he lost it, it would be seen that being gay would lose you votes. But the way they did it was not to argue for gay rights, but to not to argue for gay rights. So censorship went on. So the residents of Islington South all had more help than any other candidate would expect in the entire country. Everybody was visited by these very neat young men with short haircuts and looking in the nice clothes. Of course, unless you know what these signals mean, you don't take them to, oh yes, they hang out in the LA. You just take them to a nice young man who's happy to go to Chris Smith, etc. He had more door-by-door camps than anybody, and he got back in, but not by arguing for gay rights, but by not arguing for gay rights. And the people who censored themselves were the ones who did the canvassing for him, because they believed as well it's crucial to get him in. So you don't rock the boat and mention Islington Council giving money to lesbians, etc. Because that might mean this old education won't vote for you, etc. The same logic that affects the rest of the Labour Party affects the people inside the Labour Party, inside the subcommittees. The other way in which it has, I think, still dominate these ideas will dominate the movement, the way it has shown how weak this strategy has been, is the structure of the Labour Party's broad church has in fact meant that the decisions taken by that committee have no effect on the rest of the party. The SWP, being a democratic centrist organisation, means that if the SWP supports gay liberation, every member of that organisation has to argue and fight for gay liberation, straight or gay or whatever. And if they've got some problem with that, then they've got to either argue it out, try and change it inside, or leave. So there are democratic decisions in which you reach this decision, but that's what the party stands for. The Labour Party is not like that. You can have racist, non-racist, people support gay rights, people don't support gay rights. So inside your nice committee, everyone supports gay rights. You have no effect on the rest of the party whatsoever. The entire power inside the Labour Party lies with Neil Kinnock and his body of public opinion pollsters who decide what goes in the manifesto, who decide what's what, who decide who Sharon Atkinson cannot be an MP, etc., etc. And it's all about winning votes. The Labour Party has absorbed, does over time absorb many good activists, but it doesn't make them powerful. It has in fact made them powerless. So in other words, what I'm arguing is that all these ideas of autonomy, separatism became autonomy, the idea of a new form of left reformism, the idea of lifestyle politics, individual solutions, all grew up in the last 10 years since the class struggle went down. They're ideas that form the sort of consensus of how you would fight for gay rights, for gay liberation. The idea that what is basically wrong, we have to re-educate people, that people read The Sun, that people watch the Benny Hill show, that people watch all these nasty, horrible things. What we've got to do, the Enlightenment too, we've got to re-educate them, have positive images, have good images, show them what is really, non-sexist, non-racist ideas. In other words, it's a highly elitist view of how to change things. It also comes from that analysis that what is important is things in people's heads, their ideas. What it fails to understand is actually sexism, homophobia. It's actually based not in what people's heads, but how society is structured. The very way in which society is organised, ideas reflect that. In other words, it's much more fundamental reshaping's got to go on, other than just having a good book in the schools, although obviously we're not opposed to that, but that will not fundamentally change anything whatsoever. That in reshaping society, you're talking about building a new sort of society. And as Lenin pointed out, oppression leads to division, exploitation unites. That the struggle forward, the important thing is not to give autonomy to each group, but to link the groups together. Because the way in which society is atomised is what makes people so powerless. What the struggle is important is to link them together, to build links across the oppressed, etc., etc. In other words, the struggle itself has a generalising effect forward. All that failure to understand the family in those terms, that the family is built, is the material basis from which oppression comes, that the family is the basis from which fear and hatred of gays stems from, because people cling to the family. It's the heart in the heart of society. It's the one thing they hold dear in their lives, is their personal relationship. Because the rest of their lives are so shit, the one thing they treasure so much is their loved ones, their wife and kids. Why they go through it all is the family, etc. People cling to the family as an alternative even more. Hence homophobic ideas are so current among the population. And if the NHS and welfare state are under attack, they cling to it even more so. So Labour Party is constantly stuck with this problem of gays and lesbians being unpopular. You can't just educate people out of it. It's to do with the nature of the family being the only avenue that will have any compassion in our society. And as it remains that way, the problem will remain that way. And thirdly, that the family also is the models from which we get, where we raise our models of sexuality. Because it's not the fact that the family, just by being a lesbian or a gay, you automatically drop the models taught to you. In fact, if you look at it, the models of being a male and being a female, of masculinity and femininity, which is what the family is of course based on, we're raised up to believe what being a man means and what being a woman means. If you look at the two separate stereotypes, which are still stereotypes that lie in true of what the gay male scene is like, it is very much the masculine, promiscuous, have a good time image of what being a male is, and where the lesbian having a women is supposed to be very affectionate, comforting, nurturing, tends to be much more similar to what lesbian relationships are like. That just by rejecting heterosexuality, you don't rid yourself of the stereotypes or what male and female means, which relate back to the family once again. In other words, I'm saying the family is a central institution. It's actually the way in which a society is structured, and it has a crucial role to play. Unless society is restructured, as long as it remains there, sexism will always remain. It may take different forms, but it will always remain in one form or another. So to sum up, because I've gone on for about 30 minutes on the land, is that what I'm arguing, if you look at the history of the gay movement, you will see that what I've been saying about the gay movement could be said by and large about most movements who try to put together different classes, you've got different interests. Because the dominance of ideas inside that movement is one based on division, you base yourself on the division inside society, not on trying to overcome them. It has led to fragmentation and disintegration very, very quickly. However, what's been noticeable in all these movements going up, particularly in London demonstration and Manchester demonstration, has been a whole layer, a whole generation of lesbians and gays who have come out in the last 10 years, who are out fighting and will not go back, who are prepared to not just want to tinker with the system, but to transform the system, that want to actually rid an end to all sexism, not just get acceptance for it, not just toleration, but actually want to rid it from the root, which is the first time since the 70s you can actually say that it's happened on a mass basis. And it's the first time that, if you like, those seeds of struggle can blend outwards to actually build a new society, and how the gay movement has a history of fighting for struggle which needs to learn, because the history itself has either been rewritten or lost. And if you look at that, you'll see there is a way forward, and there's a way forward to win. Discussions have mostly been about the cause campaigns of society, given what's happened this year. Because as people have stated, the campaign is really, well, it's past a watershed. It really is coming to the point where, because the ideas inside it, the ideas from the past are so dominant, it's actually holding it back. There are so many examples. Give an example in area where I live, which is Hackney. On the Olga train to Manchester, which actually, to show the good side of the campaign, the fact that we could go down the old betrayed telephone worker, not this Fat Act, which was not really the case a year ago. And the weakness of that old betrayed is to have women's only coaches on it, which on a train. But to get to the bus, they had to go through a women's only space to get to the just had the stupidness essentially, they'd have a separate train and a bit of the train. But we met on that train on the way coming back some the Hackney lesbians who had been sort of half secretively lobbying the Hackney Council, left-wing council, not to comply with Clause 28. And we've been trying unsuccessfully to persuade them, A, to work with gay men, and B, holla, have a public meeting to try and campaign it. The logic of what do you do as separatists to try and win over the council? What they did in there was called a lobby. 24 of them on a wet Tuesday night, which is what it was, are not going to influence Hackney Council one way or the other, only by linking with other people, by having a mass campaign, having a public meeting, trying to get into where someone's got a bit of force related to the working class. Is that going to be a possibility? I mean, the way for us to argue with people, even though it's against the stream now, is how you're going to win. When these people, straight or gay, stand up against the clause, how do they keep their jobs? It has to be down to the trade union, because there's terrible pressures inside the campaign to keep it very, very respectable. Inside the main committees in London, horrendous discussions, which were it's like the GLC campaign. At the end of the day, they see the way forward as winning over the establishment because they believe in an all-class alliance. They don't want the vote disrupted, so they got very upset when those lesbians disrupted the House of Lords because it was bad for them. They thought it was really, really awful thing to do. Their idea of campaigning, and those people sort of saying about the gay news blasphemy trial thing, those ideas haven't gone away. They're still in the campaign. They still dominate the ideas, even though a lot of the activists are doing opposite things, like marching down to Downing Street. They're still thinking the wrong ideas, and they're still led off by notables such as EastEnders cast. They still wanted to make it terribly, terribly respectable. They decided a thing about plays will be banned, it's a censorship thing, it's a human rights thing, etc., etc. The whole thing to make it as broad as possible, don't rock the boat, don't be too controversial, is like self-censorship goes on inside always to hold back the movement, so the movement fragments, and there's a sort of split between the committee people, who are those generations who are used to committees, and have got the whole politics of that, which has led to a dead end, and the activists, who get pissed off by the meetings more than we are, than anybody, who only stay around for a few minutes or a few hours, and then leave after the 4-hour discussion of, which section of the market disabled should be on, and all these sort of things. They go on and on and on, planning anything mindlessly, bureaucratic cretinism is most extreme is found in many of these committees, subcommittees, and subcommittee, etc., all having their autonomy to report back meetings, to report back on a meeting of last meeting, etc. That is the way they've structured it, which is like a sort of joke imitation of the Labour Party, but without the masses. And that practice is leading to disintegration very, very quickly. And in that circumstance, we haven't got the social weight to influence how the movement's going to go. We can only, unfortunately, patiently explain why it's going like that, and explain to people how it could be different. But we haven't got the weight to make it different. And there's a terrible pressure on us, and I noticed it's something to blame ourselves. If only we can argue better, if only we can have this committee can do all that sort of thing. We haven't got the weight, the social weight. We can't get rid of the downturn in one little bit and create an upturn. And that's exactly what some people are likely to do, to blame themselves for the fact that the movement is disintegrating. All we can do is try to locate the next people, talk to them, argue them, and explain to them why it's happening, why there's a history of these ideas since the movement grew up, how they dominated, why they dominated, why the ideas of the past always dominated, have become a problem, and the way forward is trying to build links, not trying to keep inside the little boxes that society puts us in, and which the movement keep inside their boxes, even though they sort of want to decorate the box and make it nicer. That's what I want to say about the movement itself, the way forward. And I think these classes are going to get quite nasty, and she's going to go back to the days when we were spat on again, which many younger comments not used to, but some of us are quite used to. But they're going to be quite a shock to how horrific and nasty and vicious these attacks on us. I mean, when a movement starts going internal, and particularly when it's on a movement on such a personalised movement, it can get very, very vicious and personalised, much more than other meetings. And I think that we should be prepared for that possibility developing. And I think the answer to the thing about coming out is quite crucial. And I just want to repeat the argument, but to me it seems quite simple. If I look across there, I see there's a black person. Oh, there's a black person. There's a person down there. Is he gay? Well, he's not got a moustache. I mean, he's not wearing black 501. I mean, I don't know really, you know. I don't know what to say. Gays are invisible unless they make themselves so. That is one of the reasons why homophobia is so strong. Because you see, racism, the whole horrible ideas of racism, yet you work with somebody you know who's black, your daily experience can counter all the lies that pumped out by the sun and the media. Unless you're in the know what you're looking for, gays are not seen. So you absorb all the nonsense about lesbians and gays that you yourself don't know walking down the street. You've been a bus queue with 5 lesbians and you're quite nice people. Because lesbians or gays are invisible, your daily experience doesn't necessarily counter all the lies and filth you read in the sun and all the garbage in society. That's why coming out is also important, as well as the fact that unless you come out, you can't fight it with yourself either. And that's why coming out is so crucial to gay oppression and to other forms of oppression. Of course, blacks can, you can be Michael Jackson and dye your skin, etc. But it is a different situation. The invisibility is there, making it too expensive if you can become white. I'll just end up with one thing, which is that people should not have illusions, really, in how right-wing dominators and how the gay movement has, Gerard went on about how it was dominated by the middle class because of the nature of gay oppression, but how strong that was. It wasn't just the extremes of the movement, the radical effeminates, as they called them, who believe being effeminate was a positive step and people should be effeminate. It was actually the dominant theme inside the whole of the movement, the thing called gay sensibility. And all you can do is just pick up Gay Times today, or even the Pink Paper, or any of the left papers throughout the time, and you'll see there's a whole hidden messages going on in the adverts. Always judge a paper by its adverts. You always tell what they're looking to. And if you look at the adverts in the Gay Times, look at the adverts in Gay News, there's this thing called gay sense that all gays are really the same, They all like Christmas issue of novels, and they all go to the opera, and they like strip pine furniture, and they're sensitive, and they're artistic. And the whole of history can, Michelangelo was one, but he was so artistic. It's really great kind of column, and it's all this sort of imagery. It's actually a middle class view of a certain lifestyle, which is totally alien to living in Dagenham and working down there, or in a pit village or whatever. What I'm saying is that it's not just the radical feminists that accepted this middle class dominance inside the gay movement, it's mainstream as well. So it means that the main body of the gay scene, as opposed to the gay movement is very, very moralistic, terribly moralistic. The whole campaign of the London Gay Centre shows how moralistic it can be, when, there it is, £4 million given to the gay community, i.e. a self-appointed committee who call themselves the gay community, and we're both these people, they just are the community. And they're given this money to build a gay centre, and of course they have to spend £2 million to have a separate staircase for women, because they can't share with gay men. And it's near Smithfield Meat Market. What a nice place to build a building. There is the gay centre. And so they spent the first 2 years arguing and censoring themselves. Like there's a motion to ban gay skinheads who wanted to have a dance there because people found skinheads offensive to blacks. There's then the motion to ban bisexuals. Now they know. There's an attempt to ban bisexuals from using it. Then there's an attempt to ban sadomasochistic lesbians who want to go. And there's talk about self-oppression. Christ almighty. Went on and on until the fact it's now folded and has ironically been literally taken over by the Gay Businessmen Association, who now run this GLC-funded thing. And when you think that's the moralism of the movement, you look at the scene. We shouldn't fool ourselves. These are people who are oppressed. They're progressive. National Gay, which was the national newspaper which folded that just after the election, its last issue had a front page saying, "Get her out." Her was Margaret Thatcher. They didn't say go Labour, they said get her out. That was returned unopened by 60% of all gay clubs it was sent to across the country because the owners are Tory. When you think that the Gay Pride Committee will not adopt even anti-clause 28 as its symbol because it's paid for and run by the Gay Businessmen Association, which of course is Tory. When you think that the dominance of the gay, because the gay scene, the pink economy, is by and large Tory or at best liberal, and the attitude of what's happened to the Labour Party isn't mean people going to the left, it means they're looking towards the SDP or the Liberals, they're seen as alternative. You really see how right-wing the currency is inside the gay movement overall, and how the moralistic attitudes of the separatists are driven which is under effect of the bulk of the gay movement. That's the atmosphere within which has grown up during the last 10 years. There's been a deep politicization, a massive drift to the right, which is only a few isolated activists who have got sucked into the Labour Party and got this consensus of body. All these means that the movement that's grown up very, very quickly has done it almost spontaneously, actually grew up so quickly. The first demonstration in London, I suspect, horrified the organisers of that demonstration more than the police, because they were totally out of control. People were, spontaneously angry. They didn't control it at all. Compared to Manchester, the old activists have got their act together. They then controlled that demonstration. There was strict stewarding. It was all lively but safe. It was all what they wanted. And they actually petrified the people who run the campaign that the movement shouldn't get out of hand, because they see the way forward as being respectable, as winning over respectable bodies, the right people, particularly some of them the Labour Party, other people others. And that is a big hindrance on the movement going forward, because they stop it, because there's no alternative grown up, and we can't wish one up. We can't think, right, let's have an alternative that's like that. We haven't got the way to do it. The movement is down to fragmentation and it turns in on itself. In this situation, the comment asks the question, what can we do? All we can do is patiently explain, let me used to say, and try to draw the links and show how, finally, I'll end with this, that we believe that gay oppression stems from the actual way in which society is structured. But the struggle for one is struggle for all. The struggle unites. But the problem that we face is not staying inside the little boxes, but smashing the box, but building links between the oppressed. But seeing that the only section of the population that potentially has the power to create a whole new society is the working class. And in that struggle to create a new society, the working class in that struggle sheds itself with sexist, racist ideas. It has to, else it cannot achieve revolution. And the revolutionary process is necessary, not just because it's a way to achieve socialism, it is,